Even the lowliest spirit can destroy the most powerful of demons.
Holla ballers, what's going on? It's Preacher and welcome to your Balanced Druid guide, kicking this off in 7.2.5, and I'm not going to lie to you, this was a spec I gave a lot of abuse to in the alpha. Was not happy with the changes at all, but what it does do is provide a very, very solid, predictable playstyle. And in Legion, that appeals to many, many people. While it doesn't appeal to me, it may appeal to you. So we're going to go through today the basics to get you started. That's what this guide is all about, is for beginners to get into the mix of things before they end up in the horrendous mess that is endgame Legion. So let's go. So let's take a look at our talents. Well, first of all, let's not forget just how good the chicken dance is. As somebody who can't stand a Tauren caster, let me tell you, friends, every time I can pop into a chicken dance, I am one happy guy. Let's look at the Balanced Druid then. As I said, predictable, which means that to play it really well, you're going to have to utilize all of its skills to the absolute max and time things up nicely. But luckily, the way the Balanced Druid is designed, it is designed with that in mind. So let's make you aware of a few of the important spells. Firstly, our dots, damage over time spells. Sunfire, a quick beam of solar light that hits multiple targets at once. Very cool. You can see it's on this target and this target. You can cast it over here, it'll hit 2 targets at once. In fact, any targets that are in the direct radius of Sunfire will all catch the Sunfire. Moonfire, however, does not work that way. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. So we have to individually cast our Moonfires in order to keep those dots up. Generally speaking, we're going to want to keep dots up 100% of the time. That's what you're going to want to be doing in your general gameplay. But what do we do once our dots are up? So we have 2 main spells and then 2, in fact, extra spells which give us some extra bonuses. So what we have is Lunar Strike. It used to be Starfire. You might remember that from way back when. Lunar Strike calls down a strike of lunar energy, causing 180,000 arcane damage to the target and 60,000 arcane damage to all targets within 5 yards. So it's actually the opposite of Sunfire, right? So Sunfire hits multiple targets, but Moonfire does not. When it comes to our normal spells, Lunar Strike hits multiple targets, but our equal and opposite spell, Solar Wrath, does not. Solar Wrath single target, Moonfire single target, Sunfire AoE, Lunar Strike is also AoE. Now what you're going to notice when we're casting these spells is this energy bar is filling up. Yes, it is. So what we then have to do is decide how to spend this. So we have a couple of ways of spending it. We have the ever-famous, ever-lovely Starfall. Yes, our big AoE spell that's going to take a chunk of our energy. Generally used always when AoEing, right? No surprises there that this spell is for AoE. But what if we're single targeting? Then we're going to use Star Surge. Now, Star Surge does something really interesting. It gives us lunar empowerment and solar empowerment. So those are the things that we're going to be using. It buffs up our Lunar Strike and our Solar Wrath. Every time we use 1 Star Surge, we get a charge. Yeah, you see the way it's got up to 2 now? We get 1 charge each on either of these spells. Those are the main spells, besides the 1 extra one that we gained in Legion, which is our moon spells. Majora's Mask, Eat Your Heart Out. So we have 3 charges. You can actually see it here on my bars if I keep myself in combat. And what this does is it cycles through different phases of the moon. Quite a nice idea. I'm not sure if I'm fully sold on it for continuing with the Druid, but we'll see. So it starts off in its weakest form, which casts the quickest. You can see it's a 0.8 second cast with a 15-second recharge. So when I cast New Moon, that's going to switch to a new spell called Half Moon, which has a 1.64. It's doubled the cast time, right? But it also does more damage. And every time we cast a moon spell, we gain a chunk of energy. The more powerful the moon spell, the more energy we're going to get. It's a very, very simple process. So when I fire the Half Moon off, you can see it takes a little longer to cast. Lands, there we go, good times. Then we end up with the final version of this. This is the Full Moon. It deals 1 million arcane damage to the target and reduced damage to all nearby enemies. That's right, it splashes, which is very important for stuff we're going to talk about later in the gameplay section. This gives us a huge chunk of astral power. It gives us 40 astral power. So watch when we cast this. Full Moon, looks awesome, bump, does big chunky damage, splashes everything around it, and then what you notice is it resets, okay? It resets. So the first one, the New Moon, gives us 10 astral power and casts very quickly. Our Half Moon gives 20 astral power, casts twice as fast, twice as much astral power, and then of course Full Moon, which has double the cast time again, but gives us double the amount of astral power. So I want you to be very aware of those spells, and our main DPS cooldown I should always bring up, of course, is Celestial Alignment. Celestial Bodies Align, increasing the damage of all your spells by just 30%, just a flat damage increase. and increasing the astral power generated by Lunar Strike and Solar Wrath by 50%. So our only spenders of astral power are Star Surge and Starfall. Everything else we do, including the way we can talent some things, generates astral power. So you can already kind of figure out how this is going to play, but we'll talk about it more in depth later on. So what talents are you going to take with this? Well, there's a number of setups you can actually go with the Moonkin, and I actually implore that in most ways. As you've probably seen from the guides I've done recently, anytime we can have a little bit of variation is quite nice, although you might find for the most part you're only swapping 1 or 2 talents on occasion. So let's talk about it. Force of Nature generally isn't used in nearly all scenarios. However, because it has taunt, okay, so what it does is it summons the 3 treants, the 3 trees, for 10 seconds, which immediately taunt and attack enemies in the targeted area. This spell has been used in a number of ways, and you'll probably find in any written guides like don't bother with it, but I just want you to be aware that it also does taunt and stuff. In certain Mythic Plus affixes, having random adds that can die, that can taunt and take things off tanks is actually really nice, and some tanks have been very appreciative of that. So that's something I really want to bear in mind with that, although it will be listed as garbage in a lot of written stuff. Just be aware that it does have some utility, which is why I like to explain these talents to you. Warrior of Elune adds a new spell to our bars with a 45-second cooldown, so not very long at all, and your next 3 Lunar Strikes are instant cast. So based on what I just told you about the actual nature of the spells, you should whoa, the puns! The Warrior of Elune, you should now realize this is for like really bursty extreme AoE, right? Now, you have to be doing AoE a hell of a lot to be utilizing this every 45-second cooldown, every 45 seconds to its absolute max. I've seen some druids picking this up for things like Mistress Sazine, where there is always these ads up all the time. Yeah, especially when you go heroic and above. Now, this guide isn't intended for anybody who's doing heroic raiding quite yet, but still, that's the kind of occasion where there's always something to DPS over a significant portion of time. Most of the time, you're probably going to rock Starlord. Lunar and Solar Empowerments are reduced the cast time of their effective spells by 20%. So when it says Empowerment, it means when you cast Star Surge and you gain this Solar Empowerment and Lunar Empowerment. If you take Starlord, those spells just cast quicker. It's got all-round use, yeah? If you're going to be spamming some Lunar Strikes from short-term AoE, and you've put some Star Surges into there, so you've got 3 empowered lunar empowerments, they're going to cast much faster, and of course single target, just being able to cast your spells much quicker is always good. Renewal, it's a 1.5 minute cooldown, instantly heals you for 30% of maximum health. Wild Charge in Moonkin form is disengage what the hunters get. You get to bound backward. Now, I only briefly touch on these because there is barely an occasion you do not want Displace a Beast. I can't really think of one where I would want bound backwards or a 1.5 minute heal. You know what's better than a 1.5 minute heal? Being able to instantaneously get out of danger and not take life-threatening damage. Yeah, that is so much better in every occasion, is just to get the hell out of there. Be aware though, it does put you into cat form, so you're going to need to be able to switch back out. Displace Beast has such a short cooldown, 30 seconds. Honestly, this is one of those things that I think Blizzard kind of knows everyone takes Displace Beast in nearly every single scenario. But be aware of what the others do. You might need some kind of instantaneous heal, but probably not. Level 45 is some utility yet again. This is obviously with the Druid, and we're going to be talking about this a little bit over the Druid guides, is taking the abilities of somebody else, of one of the other specs of the Druid, and adding it to your own. In most occasions, you're probably going to want Resto Affinity for Ysera's gift. Heals you for 3% of your maximum health every 5 seconds. If you're not at full health, an injured party or raid member will be healed instead. So it just passively is healing people. It's pretty cool. You also get Swift Mend, which is just fucking awesome. It's absolutely awesome. So I would recommend that you have this bound in some way. Being able to pop out Swift Mend and dive back in, that quick instant heal, really good. However, I do not want to look over Guardian Affinity in any way, shape, or goddamn form. Thick Hide, so it reduces all damage taken by 6%. That's not a great deal, if I'm being totally honest. We do have Bark Skin defensively, which reduces damage by 20%. If you're a DPSer, generally when you're going to take damage is quite predictable, and a passive 6% isn't going to make a huge difference. There would be occasions where it might do. Guardian Affinity, though, was very popular in Mythic raiding last tier, because what we have, especially if you get up to the Mythic tier, or you're going to look to get there, so be aware of this. Again, this is just me making you aware of what you can do. Is you can switch it to bear form and you can use Frenzied Rejuve. So you get that damage reduction, which is very nice in Mythic. I mean, we're talking about a state of the game where people are actively taking like versatility to take less damage and avoidance, right? what you can do if you take Guardian Affinity is you can actually pop into bear form to soak something. So this was quite popular on things like Elasan Mythic, where we had to soak the Ephoric Orbs, I think they were called. We had to stand there, and then as soon as you get hit, you can have a Moonkin go into bear form for a second, take the hit, and then Frenzied Rejuve immediately after it, and get some really solid healing out there for an already healing intensive fight. So super useful for raiders. Be aware that you can do that. Obviously, you sacrifice DPS. You're not exactly full chicken mode while you're a bear, are you? No, you're not, but just be aware you can do that. Feral increases your movement speed by 50%. Again, there'll be times and places where that might be useful, but it's kind of nullified by Displacer Beast. If you are going to run around a hell of a lot, there's a talent later on that's going to help that, but the fact of the matter is you shouldn't be doing this because you're a caster, right? You want to be casting, which is kind of ironic. There used to be something called the Moonkin Shuffle, where if you were moving around, I believe it was Moonfire, got a tremendous damage boost, so you had to do this kind of thing. Luckily, you don't have to do that anymore. But generally speaking, if you do have to move somewhere and that you need the movement speed, you can probably displace a beast there, right? And switch back to Moonkin very, very quickly. So it kind of gets nullified out by that. And obviously, we're not really after the damage talents from it. Moving down to some OCC, Typhoon, Knockback, very handy in lots of scenarios. I recommend any of you, even if you're just picking up a Balanced Druid as an alt or something along those lines, I truly encourage you guys to practice your Typhoon and not look at this spell as the big noob spell. It's called the big noob spell because people don't practice with it properly and learn how to make it really good. A crisp Typhoon, I mean a really crispy bacon Typhoon, is the absolute tits. It's really good. And honestly, in a game where it's becoming more and more difficult to stand out in the crowd, doing an excellent Typhoon. Think about Il'gynoth, right? If you go into LFR or you do some normal raiding or whatever, think about Il'gynoth and the way Typhoon was needed there. So good Typhoons done properly, really good. Mass Entanglement, the places come in handy. I'm going, as soon as I see this, I go back to things like Ulduar Heroic. I forget the name of the I'm going to get a lot of stick for this. I keep thinking of Hellier. I know it's something like that. It was the Tree Lady, anyway, where Mass Entanglement and totems that were similar were so vital there. So if you need to do that, be aware that you can do it. Mighty Bash, of course, a stun. Does it come in handy in raiding? Not really. Single player out in the world, though? Yes, baby. Yes, it absolutely does. So consider that you can do that. All right, level 75. In nearly all occasions, you're going to be taking Incarnation. It just gives you a massive damage boost. It does replace your Celestial Alignment. So what happens is wherever you've got Celestial Alignment, if you choose Incarnation, that will just disappear. It's an improved Moonkin form that increases the damage of all your spells by 35% and causes your Lunar Strike or Solar Wrath to generate 50% additional astral power. It lasts 30 seconds, right? It's just a massive, massive damage boost. Now, the good thing about the Moonkin, I talked about predictability, so you can probably see where that comes from. I can predict when I want to spend my astral power and what I'm going to do with it, and the glorious way that full moon and on moon spells recharge means that as long as they're not at 3, I can pre-plan what I want to do with them. So more about that later. We can look around trinket procs, we can hold back a little bit, we have room to play as a Moonkin, which makes this very cool. Soul of the Forest, though, increase the damage bonus from lunar and solar empowerment by an additional 20%, reduces the astral power cost of Starfall. So this again is looking at like extreme AoE, pretty much. Like if you're going to be just Starfalling all the time and you don't have the Lego braces, making it free, then perhaps you're going to want to look towards Soul of the Forest. Let's talk about Stellar Flare then. This is an extra dot that you get. Okay, costs 10 astral power, so you would have Moonfire, Sunfire, and Stellar Flare. It burns the target for 150,000 astral damage, and then an additional 700,000 damage over 24 seconds. Stellar Flare benefits from Starfall's Stellar Empowerment. Very cool, but unfortunately a little weak at the moment. This is something that you're gonna have to be checking once you get higher end. Generally speaking, Incarnation is so much better, so much more predictable, and less global cooldowns. You've got to remember, although that does a lot of damage, you're adding a lot of global cooldowns into your rotation, which takes away how many of other spells you're casting, right? This is pretty common sense, but a lot of people don't think about it. Is adding a third dot in, it kind of like drags everything else out, so you have to be aware of that. Level 90, Shooting Stars. Again, one of those in like nearly all scenarios, you're probably going to take this unless you're doing just raw single target, of which not much exists. Not much exists. There's a few bosses in Tomb that are pure single target, but often you're going to be doing different things. Moonfire and Sunfire, damage over time has a 10% chance to call down a falling star, deal 32,000 astral damage, and generating 4 astral power. It's a really fancy way of saying that the more dots you have up, the more astral power you're going to generate. That's all that is. It's a really fancy way of saying multi-dotting lots of targets is going to give you more astral power, which will lead to more Starfalls and so on and so forth. So obviously very cool for AoE, right? Astral Communion instantly generates 75 astral power. The fact of the matter is we're going to be generating so much astral power that Astral Communion generally is not worth it in nearly any scenario that I've found. I played around with this recently, actually, because I wanted to be double sure about what I said here, and I just never found an occasion where Astral Communion was worthwhile, but especially because usually you're actually lining up to nuke, which involves using spells that generate astral power. Like you're setting up a big full moon, which is going to lead straight into star surges and things. Never really found the use of it. Blessing of the Ancients then. So if you're going raw single target, you probably want this. Gain a Blessing of the Ancients, activating or swapping between one of the two following beneficial effects. So what you do is you gain this. If I actually move over here, I want to show this spell off. So you gain Blessing of the Ancients, okay? You gain this new spell. We can put here. I haven't used it for a while. And what you'll do is, when you activate it, you gain a buff, okay? It's very, very simple. You gain a buff. And it'll either be Blessing of Elune, increase the astral power generated by Solar Wrath and Lunar Strike by 25%, or Blessing of Anshe grants 2 astral power every 2.5 seconds. So whichever one, it should be obvious to you now which ones you want to pick up in order to get the best use out of this spell. So there you go. I have the Blessing of Anshe right now, and I'm just generating astral power while I'm playing around. Okay, so if I'm not going to be multi-dotting, then I'm going to be using Blessing of the Ancients and then utilizing the benefits of those. Moving down to Fury of Elune then. It calls down a beam of pure celestial energy at the target location. So this looks fantastic. There's no doubt about it. In fact, I'm going to cast it for you because I love this spell. But unfortunately, not very good. So while I'm doing this, I'm going to talk about the other ones while I move out of combat here a little bit. It's the Ion Cannon spell, and you can move it around and you can do all kinds of cool things with it. I would recommend, if you're just goofing around with your Moonkin in some way, definitely play with this, man. Have some fun with it. It's not always about being min-max, especially when you're learning your spell. For all you know, tomorrow there could be some sort of patch note that means Fury of Elune is now the way to go, and you're like, I've never even casted this thing. So you can see you can cast it, you can move it. Look how cool that is. It's absolutely fantastic. I really wish there was better use for it. You can move it back as well. Whee! It calls down a beam of pure celestial energy at the target location, dealing 200,000 astral damage every 1 second until your astral power is exhausted. While Fury of Elune is active, you may recast it at no cost to direct the beam and move to a new location. So the idea of this is you have a full bar, you fire it off, and then you generate as much astral power while Fury of Elune is active to keep it up for as long as possible. In a very similar way to how Frost DKs keep Breath of Sindragosa up, it's kind of the Moonkin version of that. The unfortunate side effect of that is it's just not worth compared to not bothering with it and actually making good use of the predictability. Why add unpredictability to a spec that thrives in a predictable world? Stellar Drift. Stellar Drift increases Starfall's radius by 30% and Starfall damage by 50%. So it's AoE talent, obviously, right? It allows you to cast while moving, though, while within the Starfall's radius. So earlier I spoke about 15% move speed and things like that. With Stellar Drift, what you can actually do, and you might see people using things like the Lego braces, which gives you free Starfall, and in some occasions, it has been known, people, Moonkids are taking this on fights where they're just running around a hell of a lot, because obviously when you're running, you can't cast your Solar Wrath, your Moon spells, or your Lunar Strike. You can't do that. You can only re-dot, which is not exactly a great way to spend your DPS time if those dots do not need refreshing. With Stellar Drift, what you can actually do is throw down a spell and move around a hell of a lot while continuing to do your single target DPS rotation. So yes, it's an AoE spell, but be very aware of the moving aspect of it, because that can actually be pretty crucial and lead to greater DPS gains if you utilize that properly. Nature's Balance, then. It aligns the power of the moon and stars, causing Lunar Strike to extend the duration of Moonfire by 4.9 seconds and Solar Wrath to extend the duration of all your Sunfires. So this is a really fancy way of saying you don't have to re-dot as much. What did I talk about earlier? If you're not using all your spells and adding all your global cooldowns and all opportunities to cast spells, you're not doing as much damage as you could do. Now, if you can reduce the amount of times you have to re-dot, that just means you're casting more damaging spells. Because obviously we want these dots ticking, but they run out relatively quickly. You can see Sunfire's only up for like 15 seconds. You can see Moonfire's only up to like 17. All these kind of things mean that if you have to re-dot in a few seconds, I'm not casting Wrath and I'm not casting Lunar Strike at that point. So on that note, This is going to be your single target DPS spec, right? Seems pretty obvious now. You just have to read dot less, which means you can cast other spells more often. A very, very simple idea. So what we have here is a number of ways of utilizing our Moonkin in very obvious and clear ways, and I hope those ways are clear to you now. On the back of that, then, the statistics we're going for are going to be haste and mastery for the most part. We're going to get, you're going to unavoidably pick up crit and verse, but for the most part, you want haste mastery. We want to be casting as many spells as possible. That's going to be haste because that utilizes into more astral power, which utilizes into more spenders, and so on and so forth. Mastery, increased Starfall and Star Surge damage, which are our spenders of that astral power that we just talked about. Right? So hopefully that makes total sense. So let's look a little bit closer at the gameplay and see what we've got. So let's talk about the gameplay here. So we're going to look at a couple of builds so you kind of get the idea of what's going on here. The big thing we're going for with Moonkin gameplay is not wasting our resources. It's really as simple as that. We only have one big resource, which is our astral power. Now, if we cast spells that generate astral power and we already have full, we're just wasting resources. We don't want to do that. So we're going to be having that in mind. What I'm going to do here is take what's considered to be a very standard AoE build, which obviously doesn't involve Warrior of Elune for the reasons I've already explained. So we're going to have Soul of the Forest, which increases the damage bonus from Lunar and Solar Empowerment by 20%, reduces the astral cost of Starfall, very cool. Shooting Stars, so our dots are generating astral power, and of course Stellar Drift, which gives Starfall's radius 30% extra range, damage by 50%, and allows you to cast while moving while in Starfall's radius. This is very fun. So when it comes to AoEing, being efficient with your spells is what it's all about. And this is the difference between a good Moonkin and a bad Moonkin, right? Let's suppose, for instance, that these 4 beautiful targets in front of us are just spawned. Your temptation is probably going to be to do Sunfire. Why? Because it hits multiple targets. But if we would have waited a second until the tanks brought these together, we could have just done one Sunfire and hit them all. The trick, of course, is to just be efficient with your spells. If you see mobs appear like this, and in 1 second they're going to be gathered by the tank, the first thing you should do is probably cast a Moonfire on it, then Sunfire, and that's going to hit all the targets, right? That's what you're thinking about. When it does come to Moonfire, though, think about what you're Moonfiring, and if it's going to live long enough for Moonfire to actually do something. One of the worst things I see a lot of Moonkins do is throw down like AoE, and they just stand here multi-dotting, and they're like 1, 2 Moonfires, 3 Moonfires, 4 Moonfires. Oh, everything's dead now. And your Moonfires did nothing. They did nothing. Sunfire is super efficient for multiple enemies, right? Super, super efficient. So what you'll generally get, if you think about Hajatan Trash in Tomb, if you've not seen it yet, don't worry about it, is that there's one big ad and multitude of little Murlocs that come with it that die really fast. So on that, I'm going to go, let's say this, if I put a big skull on here, this is the big ad as we run into the room, right? Look at this for RP. I run into the room, there's the big ad. Everything's gathered up, so I'm going to Sunfire, that hits absolutely everything. And I'm going to Moonfire this target, throw down Starfall, and then I'm going to start nuking the main target and let my dots do the work. Yeah? Now remember, within Stellar Drift, I can keep casting. But all I'm really thinking about, if I'm being honest, is keeping my dots ticking and not wasting the resources I've been given. Now, you'll notice the more AoE you do and the more shooting stars and stuff like that is you'll start running into lots and lots of astral power, so you can stack starfalls, you can do all sides of crazy stuff. AoEing on a Moonkin is actually really fun. You get all this mobility. Lunar Strike, obviously, because it splashes onto other targets. Really cool. You don't get to do this that often. Things die usually quite quickly until you get into higher level content. But I recommend that you get into some dungeons and just have fun with this, because honestly, you will have fun with this, and that's something you want to do. You want to have as much fun on your Moonkin as possible. So AoEing is going to be about that, keeping your dots up, trying to be efficient with your dots, try and line things up like if it's a very set timer. So if you think about Gul'dan, when he spawns the eyes, try and think of moments like, oh, the eyes are about to spawn. What do I want then? If my eyes are about to spawn, I want to drop a Sunfire instantaneously, or maybe I actually have set up for a full moon, and I could drop it there. Remember, full moon goes to 3 charges. I am not wasting a charge of full moon or the astral power while it's still at 2. I'm not. Only if this gets to 3 and stops spinning and stops resetting, that's when I'm wasting. Like now, it's on 1, boom, straight to 2. Now I have quite a lot of time, right? I have 15 seconds before this full moon needs to even be cast, so I can play around with that. I could think about it. Oh, the ads are now spawning in like 5 seconds. Cool, I can wait. And then I can go, oh, the ads are about to come, and they spawned, and I dropped a full moon, and I Sunfired all of them. And then from there, you can decide whether you want to start Lunar Striking, Starfalling, whether you want to Moonfire them. Entirely up to you, right? This is what the Moonkin is all about. So let's switch over to a more single target orientated build. It's the same thing again, which is just not wasting resources, which involves being cyclical. But that doesn't mean that you should fall into this sort of very plebeian thought process on it. So I want Blessing of Elune. Yep, got it. If you're not sure on this, I was a bit flippant about this earlier, but Blessing of Shade gives 2 Astral Power every 2.5 seconds, but with all our gear and haste and stuff like that, the fact that Astral Power generated by Sullen Wrath and Lunar Strike increased by 25%, we very quickly get more benefit out of that, so it's quite an obvious process. Anyway, I feel like I should point this out just for safety's sake. Obviously, if you're not casting a lot of Lunar Strikes and Wraths, then Blessing of Shade would be better for you. But in that situation, you're probably multi-dying a lot, and therefore you would have taken Shooting Stars. Okay? That's the thought process that should run through your head. Single target, same again. We want to keep our dots up, right? We want to keep these moon spells recharging. And what we're looking for is the best opportunity to use our Incarnation. Yeah, this is a big dick mega damage. Now, with the Moonkin, and it being on such a big cooldown, this is 3 minutes, either your raid is going to dictate when you use it. It's like, are we bloodlusting on pull and going absolutely ham? Fair enough, I'm going to use it then. No big deal, right? But most fights tend to be about 5 to 6 minutes long, and sometimes longer. There's a video I did a while ago, which you might find interesting, and I'll link it down below, but it's about when you've got massive cooldowns at like 3 minutes. Unless you are specifically told when to use it, if the fight doesn't allow you to cast more than 2, right? 2 is usually the standard. If a fight doesn't allow you to cast more than 2, but actually goes a couple of minutes longer than that. So a 3 minute cooldown, I can cast it at 0 minutes at the start of the fight, and cast it again at 3 minutes. But maybe the fight's 7 or 8 minutes long. I'm only going to get 1 more cast out of it. That means you've got some wiggle room. You've got like a couple of minutes of wiggle room where you're still not going to lose a cast of Incarnation. You're still going to use the maximum amount you possibly can. Anyway, simple process here. Keep our dots up. And make sure we don't waste any resources. If I know that full moon gives me 40 astral power, which I do know, then I want to make sure I have room for the astral power to come in. And then what I'm going to do is use my empowered spells. Now, this is the super basic version. Don't let moon cap out of 3 charges. Yeah? Use them as best you can. Use your Incarnation when it's appropriate so you can do big dick damage. But that doesn't mean that is the only way you play this. What do we know? We know that our Lunar Empowerment does AoE damage. Is there a mostly single target fight, but still has some form of AoE? Let's think about Gul'dan again. I know Gul'dan's going to spawn, right? I know Gul'dan's going to spawn the eyes. What I could do is hold on to a couple of Lunar Empowerments. I could hold on to Full Moon and let that regenerate for that moment. I can easily fire off my other spells and keep DPSing, as long as I don't start Star Surging and wasting a Lunar Empowerment. And that means that as soon as these eyes spawn in the single target fight, I've got 3 heavy AoE spells in the bank ready to fucking go. And I can fire them off real quickly and hammer them into the target. Gonna make me look slightly better than that other Moonkin who was just dumping any spell he happened to see light up. Yeah? You could do that. Everything here is predictable. If you're holding on to them and like, oh, look at this scenario I've got myself into here. I've got Full Moon ready. And I've got 3 Lunar Empowerments. Here come those eyes. What am I going to do? I'm probably going to, if I can get the energy for it. I've got 3 Lunar Empowerments. Eyes are coming. Fucking star falls down. I'm precasting my fucking Full Moon. I've got the Sunfire in them all, and I'm going to drop 3 big dick Lunar Strikes on those ads. I just did more AoE than the guy who was just like, oh, Star Surge, Lunar Strike, Solar Wrath, Star Surge, rinse, repeat. Yeah, that's the basic way of playing it, but once you get better at your Moonkin, you're definitely going to be thinking of best practice. How can I utilize this common predictability of my spec in the best possible way? All right, guys, very, very simple process. You've got very few buttons to play with, but all of them can be used in some different ways, which I think is great. My conclusion to the Moonkin is actually pretty simple. It's a spec that knows what it's about and utilizes it to its fullest. And in the hands of good players, there's certainly ways of pushing ahead and doing well with it. The main thing I find appealing about this is that predictability. As somebody who plays a Frost Mage main, which is entirely unpredictable and can have huge damage skews on some occasions, I've got to say, coming to a predictable class, definitely I can see the benefits of being there. However, if you're looking for something that's capable of going buck wild, you're not going to find it here. You're not going to find that here. What you are going to find is something that you know when you turn up to the raid exactly what you're going to do. And if you're a very meticulous natured person, if you like knowing what you're doing minute by minute into each fight and being able to set that up perfectly and getting great satisfaction out of that, I think the Moonkin is going to be the class for you. If you like things to go a little bit crazy sometimes, it's unlikely to happen with the Moonkin. You can certainly force the issue by doing crazy AoE when it allows and running around and being all silly with your spec, but ultimately that's not what this spec's about. It is capable of doing those things, but what it's actually putting out is super consistent, super smooth, and everything you'd want to know. You know exactly what your DPS should be at point B, point C, point D. And that means that you can plan it out down to a T, and you'll get great results from that. The add-ons I'd recommend for the Moonkin are certainly to pick up something like Weak Auras to tell me when, to keep a track of the regeneration of those resources and your dots on the target. You want to make sure that you're not overcapping them, because obviously that's just going to lead to more wasted resources, so make sure you can easily visually see them, even while all the clutter of the game is going on. The Moonkin, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy, have fun, good day to you all. Bye-bye.